acuerdo. Y en esa nota, entonces creo que vamos a tener que darle paso ya entonces a la presentación de Michael Eads, porque precisamente creo que allí empezamos a desenredar esto. Hemos logrado en Colombia crear un arreglo institucional de lo más complejo para entorpecernos la gobernanza de la administración. Y lo que tenemos que traer ahora es pues las soluciones para empezar a desenredar esta madeja que hemos creado, que ha sido consecuencia obviamente de unas decisiones históricas. Entonces voy a invitar a Michael para que pase aquí al podio y lo voy a presentar ya formalmente. Michael Eads es... Bienvenido, Michael. Michael Eads es actualmente el director de Sovereing Border Solutions, una compañía que se dedica a asesorar a gobiernos y a empresas en temas que tienen que ver con seguridad en comercio internacional, en aduanas. Es un experto en los temas de política comercial, manejo de políticas de frontera, de impuestos al consumo y en tecnología de la información. Por más de 20 años ha trabajado en estos temas. Y bueno, quisiera alargarme un poco más porque tiene una hoja de vida bien extensa, pero creo que es más útil para nosotros en este momento escuchar lo que tiene para contarnos Michael, así que le voy a dar la palabra. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you for having me, and also apologize for not being able to speak to you in your language. I moved away from the Americas about 13 years ago, so I've been far away from Spanish, living in Africa, so please bear with me with the translation if you need to. We've heard a lot of really good information this morning about taxation, tax policy, economic policy, and some very, I think, very important topics. And I now have the challenge of trying to connect that with technology, and that usually puts people to sleep. So I'm gonna do my best to try to keep this as interesting as I can. Just a little bit about me and my company. We're a private sector company. We're not an NGO. We're a consultancy that just happened to specialize in tobacco control and illicit trade. I have a customs background myself, international trade and customs background myself, and we currently do work primarily for governments, NGOs like the World Bank, FCTC Secretariat. We've co-published papers with various academic universities, so we are very much in the space of illicit trade in general. And as all the other speakers have said, we've never worked for, never will work for the tobacco industry, won't even take a cup of coffee from them. So we're pretty clean in that regard. So why is this important? Why is illicit trade so important? Illicit trade is the world's largest legal illicit traded product. And 98% of that product comes from legitimate legal factories today. As customs officers, we seize only less than 1% globally. So we're doing a very, very poor job of actually capturing illicit trade in the market, keeping it out of the market. And illicit trade isn't just one thing. It encompasses different types of activities, from under declaration of local production volumes to smuggling, to round tripping, to ghost exports, transit fraud, large tobacco parallel trade. So it isn't just one problem to look at. So what I'd like to do in this discussion is talk about, oops, sorry, it's getting ahead of me there. How illicit trade, how what we talked about earlier relates to, okay, it's going to keep doing that, I'll go back, how it relates to the FCTC protocol. And I'll start with a story because it has a Colombian context. The FCTC protocol is essentially a supply chain security program, and many of you may not know it, but Colombia is actually one of the foremost leaders in supply chain security. It was one of the first places on the planet that supply chain security got its start. So in 1997, I was a very young trade analyst at Mattel Toys, the company that makes Barbie dolls and Hot Wheels and Fisher-Price, so if you have kids, you know what Mattel Toys is. And one day my boss was walking by my desk and grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Come with me." And we went up to the CEO's office. And I'd never been to the CEO's office before, so it was my first time. And we walked into a very angry Jill Barad standing there with a warehouse manager looking at a boardroom table with a bunch of pictures of Poodle Parade Barbie and 20 kilos of cocaine from one of our shipments from Mexico. And she said, and it was my department's responsibility to manage those supply chains, and she said to us, guys, do you realize that Barbie is a $5 billion brand? Do you realize that if Barbie, Coke addict Barbie gets on TV, it will kill our brand. Mommies and daddies won't buy Barbies anymore. This can never happen again. I don't care how much it costs. I don't care what you have to do. This can never happen again. And that was the origin of the very first supply chain security program called BASC, the Business Anti-Smuggling Coalition, which today is actually headquartered here in Colombia. The world headquarters of BASC is here in Colombia, because Colombia had the same problem. The fresh cut flour industry, the coffee industry had the same problem that Mattel Toys did, where we had large drug cartels targeting our products to deliver their goods. So that is the Colombian connection. So, and since that time, after 9/11, supply chain security took a twist. It got into terrorism because we were worried that terrorists would use legitimate supply chains to deliver their terror. And the first thing that governments did when they needed to develop supply chain security programs for terrorism was they came and talked to BASC and asked them, how did you do it, what did you do? And BASC was basically an industry-driven, voluntary supply chain program whereby companies took responsibility for their supply chains. They signed deals with their suppliers, service level agreements, penalties, a whole range of things, audits, drug testing, creating zones where employees could and could not go. And it was the world's very first supply chain security program. And that is what the ITP is, the International Trade Protocol in the FCTC. There's one big difference, though. All the other supply chain security programs are voluntary. Companies voluntarily join them because their core business is making products like cars and soda and foodstuffs. Tobacco never got on board. So we have the ITP, which is the world's only supply chain security program that is based on mistrust of an industry that is a serial repeat offender when it comes to illicit trade. So one of the things I'd like to do now is talk about, let me go back, some of the key provisions of the ITP. It requires the tobacco industry to register supply chain actors. Oh, that's annoying, sorry. Animation. It requires due diligence, know your customer. It requires you to understand who you're selling to, where your product is going. Sorry, I hope this is entertaining. Supply chain controls, of course, tracking and tracing, which I'll get into, record keeping, data sharing, and again, it is a treaty based on the concept of mistrust. And since the ITP came into consideration, in 2010 is when it was finally finished at the Conference of the Parties, there's been a lot of myths perpetrated about it. First of all, it's too expensive. That is an absolute myth. My colleague will tell you about his program that basically costs 1 cent per pack. They will tell you that there's digital systems known as Codentify that solve the problem. And as we know in today's world with hacking, there's nothing secure about the digital world. They'll say the technology is not ready. Track and trace is alive and well across many, many industries. I'll show you some examples now. They will tell you that higher taxes is the reason for illicit trade and that reducing taxes will solve the problem. There's more evidence against that we heard about earlier than is for that. The reality is higher taxes doesn't necessarily increase illicit trade. In fact, some of the countries with the highest rates of illicit trade have the lowest cost of cigarettes. In Lithuania, cigarettes cost $1 a pack, and their illicit trade rate is between 40 and 50%. And then they'll also tell you that Big Tobacco has cleaned up its act. They're good guys now. They got their hands slapped in 2004 when they paid, I think, somewhere around $10 billion in fines, and they're the good guys now. And as I'll show you now, that's also not necessarily the case. So what is track and trace? It's very old. The average Honda or Toyota has 30,000 parts in it. Each one of those parts has a number on it. Each one of those parts has a different production process, plastic injection molding, metal stamping, castings, you name it. They're all barcoded, they're all scanned upon production, and then they are again scanned before those parts are put into a vehicle. So if there's a problem with a part, with a brake or a piece of electronics in the car, the automotive company can tell you where it comes from. So what we're seeing now is that track and trace is becoming increasingly common. And I'm sorry, my automation here is just going a little crazy on me. But we can track the wool from a sheep, from the sweater you wear all the way to the sheep in the field. We can track fish that's been caught in the ocean to the farmer or the market where you've bought it. And if you think about, for example, Amazon, every time you buy something on Amazon, you create a unique supply chain that is unique to that particular product, that particular customer. And Amazon can tell you at any given time where the product is. But for some reason, tobacco can never tell us where their product is. And it's a homogeneous product. It's a pack of cigarettes. It normally follows the same supply chain, normally comes from the same manufacturing facility, normally goes through the same distribution routes, but for some reason, their product always gets lost, and they just don't know how it fell off the truck. So that is why we have the ITP. So what we're seeing today is that across industries, from apparel to pharmaceuticals to luxury goods, track and trace is pervasive, and for some reason, tobacco has had to be forced into this via an international treaty. So I guess the message there is with regard to tobacco, there's a lot of myths about why we can't do it, why it's too difficult, why it's too expensive, but at the end of the day, we need to get on with it. Everyone else has done it, it's time. So let me tell you why that is. So if you look at other industries, look at pharmaceuticals, what drives them? What makes them money? What gives them shareholder value? What gives them brand value? Well, consumer protection, their reputation, their integrity, brand protection, and the ability to recall product if there's something wrong. Food, same thing. They have the same drivers. The fraud incentive for those industries is very low. If you look at tobacco, consumer protection, well, they make a product that kills its user. So that's not really part of their core ethos. In terms of integrity and reputation, they consistently pay fines around the world for contravening laws and regulations. So the reputation isn't really part of their ethos either. The only thing that they care about, well, they do care about brand protection from a counterfeiting perspective, is regulation. And the incentive for fraud is very high. So what we need to understand about tobacco is we cannot compare them to other industries. We cannot put them in the same place that we put the Coca-Colas or the Procter & Gamble's or any other industry. They are a different animal, and we need to treat them differently. We need to regulate them differently. And again, that is why we have the ITP. In 2004, there was a pretty revolutionary court case in Europe that resulted in billions in fines, resulted in a settlement agreement. Even here in Colombia was involved. I don't have all the specific details to memory, but I'm sure you all do. But they haven't changed their stripes. They have a consistent track record of being either complicit or directly involved in illicit trade, and they just pay the fines. So the notion that they are suddenly good guys is something that we just can't buy into. And that's why governments need to get together between customs and health and ministries of finance, need to band together and regulate this industry a bit differently. I'm not saying we should put them out of business. I'm saying we just need to treat them differently and treat their supply chains differently. What they try to do is partner with industry. Sorry, this is a really good ad. So when it was found that low birth weight babies in the 70s were caused by mothers smoking, they took advantage of the ad, and it says, people always tell me that smoking causes low birth weight babies. What a win-win. An easy labor, a slim baby, and the full flavor of Winston. So this is the DNA of the industry that we're regulating. So if anyone has the notion that these are good guys, maybe it's time to rethink that. So let's go into the key concepts of track and trace, which I guess is what I'm here to talk about. So first of all, tracking. Tracking is the ability to mark a product with a unique number, like a serial number, which is quite old, and be able to follow it through the supply chain. So where did it go? Tracing is the ability to figure out where it came from, where it originated, the factory it was manufactured in. A unique ID, it gives the product uniqueness. Serialization is the ability to create unique IDs that can't be predicted, so they're not sequential, so they're kind of encrypted, if you will. And then security features. Security features like we have on our currency, secure inks, taggants. If you pull out a a banknote, you'll see security features. If you pull out your passport, there's security features. So all those things combine to create the concepts and the technologies behind track and trace. And again, there's nothing really magical or special about it. It basically tells us, where did the product come from? Where did it go? Is it real? Was the tax paid? And has the producer been honest in making their declaration? So that is the advantage of track and trace. Without it, without having the ability to see the licit from the illicit, you're looking at the same thing. You have no way of distinguishing the two. So track and trace gives us the ability to see that. So to put it in simple terms, serial numbers are on everything. If you look at a barcode on a bottle of water, for example, combine that with security features that we find on our currency, and you combine that with scanning events, which capture the supply chain events. It attaches an event in the supply chain to that unique code, and you see that every day when you go to the till at the grocery store when they scan your product. What it gives government is the ability to authenticate that product in the market. So when they go out into the field, whether it be a warehouse, whether it be a customs imports inspection site, or even a retail store, they can pick up a product and they can scan it and they can authenticate it. Is it real? Was the tax paid? And if it's not, where did it come from? Why was this product destined for export, or destined for a duty-free store, or destined to be in another country? So that's the advantage of track and trace. That's what is the tangible benefit. In terms of some of the building blocks of track and trace, and I'm not going to go through all of them, there's a couple very fundamental ones. And the first one is the governance model, how you actually implement the track and trace solution within your government. And the unfortunate thing about the international trade protocol is it's quite vague. It doesn't, it's basically a statute. It's not a regulation. So it's a very high level theoretical document. So governments have the ability to interpret that. And in terms of a governance model, we've developed what we believe is a best practice. And it really encompasses three main components. The first is oversight. Clearly defined roles and responsibilities, clear policies, audit procedures, and reporting. The other one is control. So making sure that there's data and systems integrity in the overall system, and using third parties. So using third-party auditors to audit the track and trace system, and of course technology. And then of course validation. Nothing is, you have to be able to measure something in order to make sure that it's still working and it's still working properly. So the governance model is very important. The next important aspect of track and trace is the unique identifiers. The industry has developed its own solution. So that little animation there, sorry I went a bit too fast. But it's not secure. So you can simply copy their number and put it on 1,000 packs, and the statistical probability of finding a twin in a sea of billions is nearly zero. In fact, there's an academic paper that I co-wrote with a professor from the University of Cape Town, where we hired a really smart mathematician to do the stats on it, and it's almost 0% of finding a twin in a sea of billions. And if you think about tobacco products, they're only on their shelf for a few weeks, and then they disappear. So if you simply just rely on a unique number, that number can be duplicated and printed on packs and dispersed, and you'll never find it. So that's why we need a security feature. So we need something that we can say is secure. When we talk about security features, the protocol calls for different types. One has to be overt or visible. That means I can see it. So if you have a banknote, most banknotes have an overt security feature on them. Let's see if I have one here. I'm running low on pesos. So I have a euro. So most banknotes have a color shifting feature where if you move the bill, it turns from green to red. That's an overt security feature. Semi-covert is something that you need a special device. So even a lens, so there's guilloche printing, there's micro printing, there's things you can see. Oftentimes when you go through passport control, then the customs agents have a little device and he'll look at the guilloche printing. And then there's invisible, you can't see it, you need a special device. It's, for example, an invisible ink or a reactive ink or something that needs a special device to see. And then the most important feature is actually what we call a forensic feature. And a forensic feature needs a specific lab equipment to be able to determine the authenticity of the feature. And that's the bit that holds up in court. So one of the things the tobacco industry has been really good at is building in their own security features for their own purposes around counterfeiting. And so government actually has no capability to authenticate a product. So government will seize a container of cigarettes and they send them off to the tobacco manufacturer and say, hey, are these real or they're fake? And they always come back as fake because they couldn't be real, of course. And this is a big problem. So one of the key features of implementing the protocol is the government needs to control the security features. They need to specify those features themselves, and they need to be able to control the ability to authenticate them, especially the forensic ones, because those are the ones that will let you win in court. So why should you do it? As I said, it's not as hard as everyone has made it out to be, but the benefits actually cut across multiple stakeholders. So obviously there's a revenue and finance benefit. You will collect more tax money. My colleague Santiago will tell you about the benefits that he's seen in his country after implementing their program. Consumers will at least be able to know they're consuming a genuine product. Cigarettes will kill you, but illicit cigarettes will kill you a lot quicker. You want to buy something that's real, you paid for it, you might as well get something real. Law enforcement obviously will finally have a tool to be able to do their job without having to just make a guess. Even the industry, it will solve their problem with counterfeiting, and of course customs, and of course the public health community, as we heard earlier. So everyone benefits from it. It's a win-win for everyone. And I think one of the problems, though, is that oftentimes governments will buy a solution and think that the problem is solved. Illicit trade in tobacco is a multi-headed hydra. It's not just one thing. So you need to implement track and trace in addition with improving your customs controls, your law enforcement controls, coordinating among government agencies so that you have a holistic solution. These are real-world benefits from implementation of the ITP. I've made the countries anonymous because we're not allowed to say who they are, but these are real case studies done by the World Bank. And as you can see, in each case, the reduction has been significant: 33% reduction in fraud in the first country, 35% increase in tax revenues. What we normally find is the first year of implementing a track and trace solution, magically, the production declaration volumes go up by about 20%. So, and the number of official registered operators or entities, producers, also increases dramatically. And again, my colleague will give you some real-world examples of that. So in terms of the correct model for FCTC compatibility, this is a simple checklist, and I'll leave this with you. First of all, independence. It has to be under the control of the government, the competent authority. Europe has made a big mistake by putting it under the control of the industry. In Europe, all the contracts for the track and trace solution will be signed between the industry and a solution provider. Governments have no rights, obligations, remedies, are not parties to any contract. So, where I come from, when you pay for something, you pretty much own it. You control who you pay. And in Europe, they are basically an observer. They're not even a third-party recipient to any contract. And that's because in Europe, the industry spent lots and lots of money lobbying. So please don't make that mistake here. In terms of the unique identifier, industry has developed its own solution. Simple way around that is the industry solution was patented by Philip Morris. No intellectual property that's ever been licensed or patented by the industry should be allowed to be used in the system. There's nothing magic about creating a algorithm to create unique identifiers, but there's no reason to use the industry solution because we don't know what backdoors are in it. It's software. We don't know what they put inside, if they can duplicate codes, if they can hide codes. So yeah, rather do your own. it has to be secure. Security features need to be sourced from third parties. They need to be measured. One-to-one relationship, for example, a tax stamp. If a producer produces 1 million packs, there should be 1 million stamps. You should be able to measure the inks. All the security feature providers that provide currency grade and passport grade security features are subject to international standards from ISO and other organizations that basically regulate the supply chain of those features. So when PMI tries to tell us that the red ink in Marlboro is a security feature, it's unmeasurable. We don't know how much of it is out there. Non-removable, of course, we don't want stamps being taken off and putting on other packs, but that problem is easily solved. And then, of course, the data needs to be secure. We need to make sure that the data is secure. The data can't be stored on the production line where a worker can put a thumb drive in, take 1,000 codes and ship it off to Dubai or China and have those products show up as legitimate but actually fake. So those are just some kind of simple guidelines when you get to that point. I don't think you're quite there yet. This slide just really, again, shows you what not to do from a European perspective. I've just discussed it, but again, I'll leave this with you. What's wrong with the typical excise paradigm in most countries is the officers who are responsible for inspecting and regulating are too close to the manufacturers. They're usually in the factory, or they spend a lot of time with the factory. Most excise declarations are self-declared. So basically government relies on the industry for reporting what they've produced. It's based on physical counts. So some poor officer has to walk into a factory and start counting big mountains of boxes. That's not very accurate. So we need more production controls actually on the production line so we can actually count how many packs are coming off the line, how many pallets are being loaded, et cetera, et cetera. And again, one of the problems is most of this auditing is done in paper. And in today's day and age, there's no reason to be using paper. And this comes with huge integrity and data quality risks, and it gives us a false sense of control. So in terms of going forward, where do you start? First of all, you need to understand where you are. What is your illicit trade archetype in the country? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from cross-border? Is it under declaration? Is it round tripping? Is it ghost exports? You need to understand where it is, your local context. You need to look at some relevant benchmarks, neighboring countries who've had experiences, go visit them, see what worked for them, what didn't work for them, develop a strategy, and then look at this from a holistic perspective. It isn't just buying a solution from a vendor. It's actually looking at the capacity of the agencies that are responsible for regulating tobacco. And in the case of Colombia, it's rather complicated because you have a rather bifurcated system of regulation. So I think in most countries, what's typically required is to have a lead agency that kind of steps up and says, okay, we're going to take charge, and they work with the other agencies to move the agenda forward. So again, moving forward, track and trace is dependent on multiple stakeholders. You need to work together. You need to collaborate with NGOs. This is a public health treaty that was, oh boy, here we go. This is a treaty that's done by public health advocates, but it's actually enforced by customs and revenue authorities. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't buy into the rhetoric that track and trace is complicated or difficult or impossible. Every other industry is doing it. Keep it independent. Can't use the industry solution. Go out to the market. Go to a public tender. It has to be transparent, open, fairly competed. And integrate the law enforcement with the health agenda. I think that's very, very important to do, and to make those connections, to have the research behind it, to study the effects. This type of program will always be attacked by the industry with endless resources in Parliament, and so you need to be able to measure your success. And countries that have done it have been able to prove that it works and it's beneficial. So, and I think also think beyond the FCTC ITP as a minimum standard. Look at this as an opportunity to modernize excise in general. You can use the same solutions for other excisable goods. Alcohol, for example, has similar issues. So that is all I have to say on that. I'm happy to entertain any questions. I hope I didn't bore you with the technical stuff, but thank you again for your time.